So maybe I would start. I can see your beautiful bookcase behind you. So
Yes.
could you maybe at the beginning give us some brief definition of how you understand a book as a medium? Because when we look into history and also when we look at other cultures, for example, there are examples which we wouldn't probably identify as books in the very traditional ways. So maybe if we could start with this brief description of how you understand a book medium.
Yeah, there might be plenty, but I personally think about the book as a specific space.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's very important to understand the book as a structured space, and its structure, I mean, it's traditionally intended as fixed,
Mm-hmm.
but it's possibly not. So what I mean is that on one side, it's important to understand its structure as a physical structure, and we all refer to that physical structure when we refer to the book. But then the content and how the content inside is structured follows only the limitations of the spaces within, which are the pages, of course. But starting from this acknowledged structure, the pages usually meant to be in a sequence, we can start to expand this space as much as we want. So what I mean is that, of course, we have seen plenty of experiments with non-sequential structure of books, with restructuring of the space. And personally, I'm particularly interested in how the space, let's say, within the book can be expanded in multiple senses. Just briefly, I would just like to add more that actually the space within a book expands in the very moment we are reading it. It expands from the physical pages to our minds and possibly creates all sorts of memories, connections, and such. So it's already expanding. But it can be also written or structured or technologically enhanced in order to expand even more, giving even more possibilities to expand its own content.
So in this context, there is a very, your own term post-digital print, which you described in this book, is very important. You wrote this book in 2012, I think.
Yes.
So could you maybe please explain the term itself, post-digital print, and how it relates to this basic definition of a book that you have explained earlier, previously?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, the book, I mean, let me start with a small story about the book itself, which I think is quite significant. The book was the result of residency of two institutions, the Pietzwart Institute and the Baltan Laboratories, Pietzwart Institute in Rotterdam and the Baltan Laboratories in Eindhoven, together with the publisher, Onomatopoeia, who physically published the book. I just wanted to say that the book was released officially 2 weeks before it was ready, before it was printed, because its printed edition was ready. And it was officially released through a press conference, if you want. And it was officially released just releasing the file, the PDF, for free.
Yeah.
It was an important gesture, in my opinion, because the PDF was released through Monoscope, which is quite famous platform for free PDF, free books about culture, politics, and art, through which we can download the PDFs, but it's also contextualizing them. But during this event, we were also giving out USB sticks with the PDF of the book. Why that 2 weeks before the official releases? Because actually the book was paid through these residencies. And so, I mean, I was already paid for the residency, so I didn't need potentially more money from it. And the printer already got the money for printing it. So although the book would have been for sale for the publisher, who needed, of course, I mean, wanted to make a commercial profit, obviously, from it. But the idea was that there was already an economy around it, and we could release it before, also to seed potential interest in the readers. And I have to say that probably there's been a lucky gesture as well, because the book became quite popular, especially over the first years. But I think that it was important as a gesture to just release the book. One of the things I'm usually telling about this moment is that I was a bit embarrassed because the USB sticks had a small paper tag. And those who came asked me, you know, to sign the paper tag, like the signing the physical books, which was a funny thing. But the term post-digital was picked up actually thinking about who used the term for the first time. Actually, Kim Cascone, a musician, made a paper in early 2000s talking about the term post-digital. In this paper called The Aesthetics of Failure, he was referring to glitch music, and especially to the fact that producing music digitally at that moment, even in that very niche procedure, methodology of producing it, was already giving all the digital infrastructure for granted. So post-digital, or coming after the digital somehow, in 2012 seemed already like something like, okay, it's about to come, but not yet, but maybe in a month, in a year, or whatever. I have to say that 8 years later, we have just accelerated this process. Now we are heavily depending on the digital infrastructure on any possible level. And for print specifically, there are these contrasting terms that I've tried also to describe 8 years ago. So on one side, the almost impossible to improve model, standard, the system that a book is, a system, I would specifically remark, and all the possibilities of digital. The whole book was about, as I've tried to describe it, the marriage of these two dimensions rather than the competition. And as I said, or the dating about these two dimensions, and it's the same joke that is in the book. When you start dating somebody, that's exactly when the problems start. Okay. So, and that's, I mean, the problems of trying to have these two dimensions together started already back then and are still yet to be defined a lot. But I'm still very convinced that there are plenty of possibilities. And all these possibilities are not just meant to create new commercial products or to celebrate the digital infrastructure. Rather, I think they would be meant to make a better use of the enormous amount of culture we can access, and especially to enhance our cultural and learning possibilities and connecting possibilities as well.
Actually, it's a synthetic term. So maybe do you expect another? It's a difficult question, but do you expect in the future another antithesis that would again create new context in which something really very different would occur? I don't mean this plurality of or binary opposition of printed and digital, but something absolutely new and different that would again create demand for another synthesis. Or maybe it's
No, I completely understand the question. This duality that I just described. Well, there has been already, I think, a silent revolution that has changed for publishers. For publishers, it changed completely. Let's say the game, the business game, and as you might guess, I'm particularly fond and I care mostly about independent small publishers rather than big commercial ones. And this silent revolution is, of course, social media, in terms that they have created a methodology of publishing, in quotes, which we can call micro-publishing. That has already revolutionized the game in terms that there's a lot that we can already access, even if it's not comparable to a small book or a magazine or whatever else. So there's already this form that has been probably way more effective in terms of wide use among the public compared to the electronic book, for example. So I think that we have this these different forms. I'm writing a new book actually, and I'm trying to elaborate them in what I'm calling an ecology of publishing, because it's becoming more complex, which I think it's a good thing in the end. And in this ecology, trying to answer your question, if there will be a new alien beast that would be in a way challenging once more what a system that is already more than 5 centuries old.
Exactly.
Well, possibly. I mean, I'm personally, I've tried to avoid as much as possible the futurist hat, trying to predict the future, because obviously, more often than not, you are wrong. But I have to say that I've always thought more than a new outstanding technology that would try to replace what is already working so well. Because, I mean, if we quickly scan these 3 formats, the classic printed book, the electronic book, and the micro-publishing of social media, they have 3 completely different roles. The printed book is more and more acknowledged as the original, the trustable source. The electronic book is invaluable in terms of searching and discovering, and the micro-publishing is very effective in terms of finding new things very quickly and start to expand your own micro world. So there can be a new technology that can possibly combine or I mean, in a classic science fiction trajectory, they can kind of connect into our minds or analyze our persona and trying to find whatever sources that might interest us for real. I mean, current AI models are not so effective in doing that. But in the end, I think that for the reading activity, we will still be affected by our traditional way of reading. And I'm still thinking about all the possible technologies that I can imagine at the moment as technologies that can enhance such a good and proven and worldwide acknowledged system as the printed book, more than replacing it somehow.
And what is it about the printed book or the codex form or paper that makes it so important and so durable technology? And why is it so successful in terms of how long it lasts and how long we use it and for how long we take it seriously?
I think that there's a very important characteristic, which sounds like almost a banal one, which is that in a word, I mean, during this pandemic, we are experiencing it quite dramatically. In a word that is in personal environments, losing progressively, increasingly, our material dimension. What I mean is that we are already spent a lot of time with screens, which means with very ephemeral content. Ephemeral content just disappears just when we change the screen content. And we are spending even more time now with screens because of the pandemic. So even less material entities that we can relate with. So having to relate so much with ephemeral digital content, I mean, ephemeral in this sense is not that it's not important, is that it's just vanishing. Or, and this is another thing I'm researching now, the digital has another very important characteristic, which is that it can be reprogrammed at will, which means changed at will. So in this very ephemeral, uncertain system, environment, the characteristic of the book to be unchangeable, physical, so not going anywhere. If I leave it on my desk, it will stay on my desk until somebody will pick it up or throw it out or whatever, or burn it. So this physicality and unchangeability, if this is an English word, it's the most important characteristic that we have now. Also because the production behind means a lot of effort. It's a big effort to produce a book compared to micro-publishing, compared to the digital one, because it implies a few processes. And so when you produce a book, a physical book, this effort means that there has been a validation, that the content has been carefully checked and validated. And when it's validated, it stays like that. So it can finally be a reference. And in this very ephemeral environment, I think that the referential quality of printed books is particularly important.
In your later articles, you talk about hybrids of hybrid forms of printed books and digital books, and you would also talk about false hybrids and true hybrids. So could you maybe describe briefly the difference between these two categories, or give us some typology of examples of true hybrids that you would maybe like to mention?
Yeah, okay. Basically, by hybrids, I mean experiments at the moment, because that beast that you were mentioning before has not appeared. We don't know if it will, but hybrids are a kind of genetic engineering, if you pass me this metaphor, to arrive to reach this beast, or just to enhance what we already have. So it means that we can have a printed book with digital technologies embedded in the page, which doesn't mean necessarily hardware embedded in the page, but it can be some signs that trigger software. Or other type of enhancement. And by digital hybrids, it's more or less the same thing the other way around. We can have digital publishing environments that can trigger somehow some changes elsewhere. But the true and the false, a true hybrid, when I started to think about this concept, I thought about exploiting the technology that we have now. And basically, we have two types of essential infrastructures. One is the network, the internet at large. And whatever network can be attached to the internet, or whatever network we can create on our own in a certain place. Disconnected from the internet, not necessarily connected to the internet. So the network, which is already an enormous infrastructure, which we can use, or a smaller one that we can create, and the software. The two combined, it would sound so trivial, but it's really not. When we stop thinking about using the current possibilities, and so posting on social media, searching on search engines and whatever we take for granted. And we start to think what we can do autonomously with our own software, or using software for our own purposes, which have not been already scripted or dictated by the big industry. And in this sense, if we combine what we can potentially do with software and networks with the culture that is validated within publications and books in particular, there are plenty of interesting scenarios. So a false hybrid, it's simply the magazine with a QR code, and when I put my phone on the QR code, there's a video, a commercial video which is triggered. Okay, it's nice. I can see the video, it's a nice one, but it's just expanded advertisement. It's not adding anything to the system of publication. It's just adding an enhancement of the spectacle that I can have. And it can be similar in terms of having enhancement of content per se. What I mean is I can have a sport newspaper, and there can be even there QR code or whatever sign that can trigger the video of the best, the highlights of a specific match. Again, it's just an enhancement that I can have elsewhere. It's just a shortcut. By hybrid, by true hybrid, I mean software and networks that can trigger processes involving people socially at a distance. So imagine if I write a book about climate crisis, which would involve a series of ideas about them. And imagine if these ideas are, let's say, roughly scripted. And if through software networks, I don't have a technical solution at the moment, these rough ideas can be tested somewhere else, like on the other side of the world from where I live. And once tested, they can send back and modify the book that I have, but not a digital one necessarily, even a print one somehow. Or if I have a book that at some point has the chance to send some signals somewhere, to send whatever, like money, for example, a very small amount of money, or a tangible and verified sign of support, for example, towards somebody or some causes. So I'm thinking about it as enhancing social purposes or social processes through software and networks, starting from a validated publication, which already means a body of culture which is very well defined and structured. This kind of hybrids would be the one that I would be really fond to see and also to potentially contribute to if I would have the chance. But technically, of course, it's not easy. The only technical standard that we have now are basically codes or whatever sign that our phones can recognize and send. But I would love to have, I mean, people in general, but potentially, I mean, people involved in technical research, more involved in developing this kind of hybrids. I think there's a lot of potential there.
Mm-hmm. And could you please name some examples, recent examples that help to illustrate this approach?
Well, unfortunately, there's not a lot of research in this respect, so I don't have many. The kind of example, the kind of tests that I've seen lately are mostly mostly use the book as an archive, as a repository of some software experiments. So there are plenty of, for example, AI literature generation, recreating a slightly different type of book every time and printing a single copy. I mean, at the moment, it has evolved from the classic generative approach to something more technically evolved, because the generation is influenced by some specific parameters which change all the time. Again, if we think about, to give an example, you can think about a book about a novel about climate change, which changes its own story based on what kind of data it can access. Nick Montfort at the MIT University is experimenting with this kind of publishing effort, making whole books and novels based on these kind of procedures.
I can ask, what do you think about if you are transfer physical book to the internet interface, some kind of web interface, this kind of digital book on a website? It's, if you think it's a hybrid form, or it's only transform the physical book to digital. What do you think about, maybe?
Well, in the post-digital period, so 8 years ago, I was trying to be as sharp as possible with this. I think it's a great thing to have a digital copy of a book, but basically it's taking a book and transforming its matter into something different. So it's very useful, but it's already something different once I have it on my screen, for many reasons. I'm not going to all these reasons. One is, for example, that I completely lose the dimension of the book once I have it digital. So when I pick up a book, I know how big it is. When I have it online, I will never, I mean, I have to check. I have to make an extra effort to know if it's 24 pages or 2000, for example. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's a hybrid, because once you digitize it, it won't evolve. It will stay like that. It won't necessarily trigger something. But mentioning again software and infrastructure, it would be great. I mean, now there's a strong trend to have PDFs or digital versions of books available anyway, in any case. Sometimes after a while from the printed publications, or to have repositories, or especially to scan old books which are out of print, which I think it's another great thing, or rare books, of course. But why not taking the extra step? That's my main question. Why not thinking about software that can connect different digital books, content, in order to give us possibilities to jump from one content to the other, making a kind of curated bibliographies in an automatic way? I think that the human perspective is still very needed in this process, but still the software can give a true, sometimes an accidental, sometimes it's able to find the connections that we are normally not able to spot. So you might discover books which have been printed 20 years ago and have forecast what we are experiencing now, or what might happen in 10 years. What I mean is that, I mean, this is a kind of librarian, dream and nightmare. Foucault was talking obviously about the potential among the different books in a library. So what could happen if the books could talk each other, or if we could see the whole content at once, and we could make, we could establish connections among the books in a library. So if that is already like this, we can imagine that for a library. Why can't we start to think about that for digital libraries and start to exploit the technologies that we have in order to understand more and make meaningful connections that we just are not able to do now? I would like to finish with one specific perspective, which in this new book I'm trying to foster a bit. There's a mantra from the big industry, which is providing technologies that solve your problems, or enhance you, or give you the tool to make something you have never done before by themselves. If you think about all the marketing, on cell phones, smartphones camera, it's all about, you will make pictures you have never been able to take before, thanks to our computational power process, whatever. So we are giving you this magic wand to make something new. But it's all in a black box. And I mean, I'm being very close, I'm still very close to the hackers community. And they think in a completely different way. It's to open the black box and to use technology as our best ally, your best friend, but a kind of sparring partner. So a tool that would help you to do something in a different way, possibly in a more, in a culturally enhanced way. Not necessarily better or more technically better, but culturally better. So the argument I'm trying to expand in these new writings is that we should have tools that should help us to research better and to write better, or which means to find new kinds of results, new kinds of strategies. So to use AI, for example, as a tool, as something that would help us in the weak spots that we have, not providing us pre-cooked solutions somehow.
Mm.
This would be kind of hybrid somehow, again, that I would be interested to see and to expand.
Victor, you have a question, or do you have a question, Victor?
Yeah, but I think also about because it's different because I have some experience with visual book as I kind of different with hybrid, but also different in a textbook because there's a lot of page with reading, but in a visual book we tried something together. If we have more links between the same image in the book, you have only one use position, something like in a pages, but in a interface of the internet, you can write more links between the same image or different image or more image together, But I don't know, it's if it's the way, but it's experience only.
I think it's already a way to expand the possibilities. And it's not just about, I mean, that is connecting different visual material, as I understand it, which triggers different processes. I mean, our mind is capable of relating all with a very small number of items all together and having the possibility of quickly changing them. It's generating different thoughts in our mind as well. So it's a useful tool. And it's an extra tool, especially if it's connected with something that has been processed in a physical book. It can help. The hybridization, I mean, the hybridization I'm trying to foster somehow is to really trigger whole processes somewhere else. And especially, and this is again another thing I've spent quite a bit of time lately, to create networks, to create your own networks. That means also that you create a network of entities, and they can be just physical entities, or they can be persons, and you have a human network. And if you connect these things all together, there will be new kinds of processes, I think, that might be triggered, especially if the results are then shared back, and they lead to a new collective elaboration, or to a single person elaborating the outcomes, but thanks to a collective process. I think that there's a lot, again, to unexploited potential in the networks. I've personally seen the internet truly since the very beginning. My first email dates back to 1993 when the Neuro magazine was founded. Actually, I decided to spend some money to get an email address because I was starting a magazine. But compared to the utopia, to the internet utopia from the 90s, there's not a lot that has been made after more than almost 3 decades in terms of the social potential, the cultural potential. There's a lot that has been made in terms of technology and business, for sure.
I would maybe ask, do you think that the big publishing industry or commercial publishing industry is aware of this potential that you have been describing, and that it's able to accommodate to these changes, either technological or cultural, or is it still very similar to this, lack of
I can give you a straight answer. Basically, no, because the big commercial publishers, medium-sized to the big one, they are business based on a very classic business structure. So the main aim of a business is to generate profit. And to generate profit, whatever is in between, whatever, let's say, complicates the production or the distribution or the sales, it's an obstacle to increase profits. So unless there's the new beast you were mentioning in the beginning, so a very standardized universal thing that can be adopted all over the world, then they usually are not interested. That's why this hybrid I'm trying to explain are not food for the big industry. I think they are more, at the moment, they can't be but experiments, but they are more tools that can be potentially used by independent publishers to create new kind of models of publishing, so to enrich this publishing ecology that is expanding since we are having networks, basically. And I mean, which doesn't mean that we wouldn't see innovation in publishing, but all the innovation, I've tried to be very attentive to what has happened during this, especially since the book was published, since post-digital print was published. I haven't seen that much technical innovation that was meaningful for commercial publishers. Again, and I think that the reason is the one I was mentioning a minute ago. I mean, innovation, I'm not against this word, but it's usually considered a bad word in the most, I mean, in the cultural elite, so to say, because it's very connected to an industrial scale. And I don't want to reiterate it once more, but that's also one important element, the scale. What I mean is, if we now let's take social media for a second. Social media are based on the concept that you should let's say do as much as possible on social media platforms. Post as much as possible, interact with as much as possible people. Let's say you are one wheel of this enormous mechanism that should, and the ideal state is that this mechanism just goes on and on forever and expands indefinitely. The problem is that we are not used to this scale. I mean, even if you look at how many friends you have on whatever, or followers, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever platforms you use, imagine if you would have all that people in the same room. You wouldn't know, even if you are friends or follower or whatever, you wouldn't know how to behave with them. And they are for sure too many. And that's about the scale. We are triggered to increase these figures because that's in the social media economy. I'm not saying, okay, this is completely wrong and we are going to hell. No, but we are making a big effort to maintain this personal infrastructure. And my take is that we should scale them down because it's very complex to maintain all these relationships somehow and to deal with our digital infrastructure as well. If we scale it down, and once more, we scale down our own networks, our network of friends in whatever social media platform, and we start to have more meaningful interactions with them, then we have reached something, I think. We have scaled down complexity, and we can do more meaningful gestures. And it's the same, I think, in publishing. When I think about independent publishers and they have to struggle especially to survive, I mean, they have to invest a lot of efforts, invest money, invest a lot of work in order to make their own business viable, sustainable. I think that from those who I've had the opportunity to see, the biggest mistake, I think, is trying to emulate the big ones. It's a different type of business, I think, when you do something for a smaller amount of people. Then you are having almost, you are becoming almost a public service, which is not public, because you have to pay for it. It's a business. But you start to have a different role. And this kind of publishing, I think, it's can create these different models. But it's based on networks, your network of customers, your network of supporters, whoever they are, those who are working for you, those who are distributing your own stuff, those who are sympathetic, other fellow publishers with whom you exchange. Sometimes you discover a better, sometimes more ethical printer, and you switch to that one, or a local one. All these elements combined with the possibilities of technology can have a terrific impact, I think, on culture. Personally, I've tried to apply them on Neuro magazine, which is and always been an experiment in publishing as well. And I think that in some respects, we had some good results.
Maybe I would quote Johanna Drucker, who is a theorist in data visualization and also digital humanities and artist books. And she says that artist books are almost always self-conscious about the structure and meaning of the book as a form. So would you agree with this quotation? And how do you think that this insight, that is specific for these small scale networks, maybe can influence the bigger structure, the bigger publishing approaches that we have just discussed?
I completely agree with Johanna Drucker. To make an artist book, you have to be aware of the structure. Otherwise, you would probably just make another book. And instead, to be an artist book has to challenge even a bit the structure somehow. And also there, I mean, these are the artist book that I particularly like, those who are challenging the medium more than treating the book as a sculptural element. That said, the artist books are, I mean, there has been an increasing production. Again, I like to compare it with vinyl records increase of sales over the last few years, which is something that, speaking of playing the futurist role, literally nobody predicted before. There was a moment when the vinyl records were thought to be done in another few years, and now we have vinyl record sales which are comparable to those of 20 years ago, even more. So it's an incredible in this respect phenomenon, and I think that it's there's this component which I think it's important, which has been defined in many different ways, the revamping of analog, the fascination of, I think, of the material. I think that it lies in the proximity and manipulability of materiality that we can have with physical medium related objects, which is true for a book, for a magazine, for a record, and for quite a other few things. So, and artist books, there has been a quite increased production from my own perspective in the last few years. Not only because there is an increased market, there has been an increased number of artist book fairs all over the world, but also I think because it goes in parallel. That's why I'm saying it goes in parallel with vinyl, because the production of quite beautiful material publications, which are, as Drucker says, challenging the structure, it makes them even a more beautiful object. Would they influence the bigger infrastructure? Well, I think that some ideas would probably do it in small respect, but they might. But we have to again distinguish. I mean, the paperback novel in 10 million copies from the coffee table book about a painter in let's say 10,000 or 100,000. They are two completely different beasts. So they might influence the coffee table book, I think. They might influence a few different products, especially because the level of involvement that artists are taking in this production is quite high. So there's a lot of ideas and technical solutions that are being employed at the moment in these artist book productions. I also have to say that it's a relatively harder. It is becoming relatively harder to say, okay, this is an artist book and this is a commercial book, because by definition, an artist book, as we have learned to recognize it, should be very few copies, should be a series, should be sold as an art piece. But now this definition has been expanded to a production of 500 or 1,000 or even more, signed or not, numbered or not. And sometimes when an enlightened publisher makes an experiment with a publication, it's hard. It makes a good experiment with a publication. It's just a publication for sale. It's not said, okay, this is an artist book. It's hard to say why that is not an artist book compared with this one that has been produced in just 5 copies and sold as an artwork. So I mean, the borders are vanishing somehow, among the categories. But I think again, this is a good thing because it brings more ideas and more solutions, and the more solutions about the format means that there's a more diversified environment, and so this ecology of publishing is increasing somehow. It's expanding instead of being deprived.
Right.
Victor, do you have some question or maybe some other issue to open for topic?
I think we are very straight on this topic, and I think it's great. And now I think, I also want to ask, but this artist book, this is the topic what I'm interesting also, because I'm working with different kind of author's book, but it's like first time it's like diary, sketchbook, and author's book is put together, and it's more like 30 years, and every books are only one edition, and and I still thinking about how to refresh it, something like how to publish it, something like, or it's the best way to put on a interface on a web or something like, or remake that, or make a links and different kind of books, something like. But you are said is the definition of author's book is very big spectrum, something like.
I have to say I find once more parallels with the independent music scene. You know, we are following especially the experimental music for Neuro, for the magazine. So I'm quite familiar. And there's a lot of small productions, but also there are different models which are tested. So the more often than not, there are a few different editions of the same work. So there's the pure digital, the physical in some form. Sometimes there's a limited, very strict limited edition, special edition with something more, which is expanding the thing. Again, I think that it depends on the trajectory that you want to take. Once more, I'm particularly fascinated on the connection among different elements. So if you think about the project, from an artist's point of view, from an artist's perspective.
Because also I'm thinking about if you are in one edition, it can be unique. You know, what is the quality of of the artist's book, something, and particular I don't know. It's but interesting is all the way the next step in the work with content. What to be flowing book to book, something like,
Yeah, exactly. And that's the trajectory I was thinking about, and how the different content can literally travel from one publication to the other, or influence the next one and then the next one, and so on and so forth. I mean, this is a concept of series in itself. But from an artist's point of view, it can be more specific and have planning in advance the series somehow. One can think about how some content can travel to the next one almost physically and can influence then the subsequent one, or can and at the end they can even make the same path back in some respect. Again, there are, I mean, technically, there are ways of, we have basically two technologies that are applied. On one side, better than me, we have the print on demand, which is allowing you to produce a very single copies that change all the time. And so it can be something that can be tested practically and technically on a platform like that. But it can also be with some, in some respect, with associating some static codes on physical books that can trigger different meanings on a digital screen, online, or even locally. That's another thing. I mean, it's the online infrastructure, again, it's a big opportunity. But I was also starting to ponder that, I mean, now it's probably not the case with the social distancing and all the rules we have to follow, but how important can be to share an experience in a limited amount of space. Yeah. So instead of thinking always in terms of online and I mean 24/7, 24 hours availability of something, to have something that is available only for 1 month in a space, can be a gallery, can be a library, can be anywhere, can be in the street, and only for people that would physically be there would be actually available. I would love, for example, to have a tourist guide, printed tourist guide, that would activate something when I'm actually traveling exactly in that place, instead of, and I'm in front of that, of the place which is described in the guide, instead of having, I mean, all the possible content on a screen that would just disappear. It would be something different. Imagine if you would have pages of a book turning all turning completely green when you approach some rainforest, for example, or something like that. I mean, just improvising here, of course, but I think it's that kind of local enhancement that is important also for us. And in this case, it's even if it can use networked technologies, it's disconnected from this concept of having everything global and universal.
Will these ideas maybe somehow influence the way in which your new book is going to be published?
Unfortunately not. That's not an... I wish. I wish. But that could be another project. This new book, it will take a while. For most probably, it will not be ready before 2022. But it's a kind of continuation of post-digital print with new perspectives. I mean, new takes on publishing in general and what we mean by publishing now, but always from a critical perspective. I'm dedicating quite a substantial amount of time to that. It's part of my academic research as well, but well, I think it will be worth for readers, of course, for those who will be able to read it in the end.
Do you already have a name, a title for the book, or is it still?
There's a working title, but it will probably be changed. So I don't think it's actually worth to share it, because it will probably be, you know, wasn't it like this? No, I mean, I have a title in mind, but I think that the publisher will probably ask to change it. I'm completely open to that, of course.
But maybe just to wrap up the conversation, I would ask you if you could summarize the most significant changes that you probably incorporate in this new book that have occurred since 2012 when you published post-digital print. Could you maybe just briefly tell us what do you see as?
Yes, of course. I have to say that part of the book is, before mentioning the changes, is related also to my own practices. So the publishing practices, but also the practices related to the neural archive, a bit of, you can see on my back, of course, and to these other practice, which is the temporary libraries, which I'm doing from time to time in different places. But basically, the book will be about the process of reading, what it means to read now, and how it involves our different senses. It will also be about how we relate to writing as well, with all the deviations from traditional writings that we can apply now with technologies. From this archiving and libraries project, you can imagine I'm also trying to expand on what it means to archive, what it means to create or to access, mostly to create collections of material. So from the small focused library to the role of libraries in our very digital now environment, or post-digital eventually, if you want. And finally, I will try to synthesize as much as possible what it means to publish basically in 21st century. especially inspired from quite a few experiments, including artist books that have been published over the last 10 years or so, basically after post-digital print was published.
Do you plan to publish it in a traditional way or as a hybrid, maybe? Or
the publisher is I would like not to mention the publisher because I mean again still there's I would like to talk about it when it will be out, and it's still quite a long way. But is a quite traditional publisher, so there would I think I made a proposal of something that was probably way too weird to be taken into consideration, and it was just not possible. But I mean. There could be possibilities of specific experiments maybe in the future, or also, I mean, there are always chances. Post-digital print has been translated into 5 different languages. The last one, which I haven't announced yet, but it has been just translated into Spanish in Latin America. And each of these translations is possibly a new chance to do something. So if not in the main edition, in the first edition in English, maybe in if they will happen in other editions, there might be a chance to make some further experiments. I would be keen to try to experiment with some possible hybrids that would be okay to be qualified as hybrids and not just as small, let's say, games about publishing itself.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot.
You're very welcome. It was my pleasure. Very interesting conversation.
Great. It's great for us. And we will have to make another conversation after your new book is published so that you can explain everything again.
Of course. I would.